This story comes from a guy I'm calling Brandon. This happened to him about 3 years ago when he was driving home from a business trip in rural Texas. Brandon had stayed late at a conference and didn't hit the road until almost 11 p.m. He had about a 4-hour drive ahead of him, mostly on empty country highways. He'd done this drive dozens of times, so he wasn't worried. About 2 hours in, somewhere around 1 a.m., Brandon was on a particularly desolate stretch of Highway 83. No streetlights, no other cars, just his headlights cutting through the darkness and endless fields on either side. That's when he saw her, a woman standing on the side of the road, thumb out, hitchhiking. Now, Brandon's first thought was, who the hell is hitchhiking at 1 a.m. in the middle of nowhere? But as he got closer, he could see she looked young, maybe early 20s, wearing a white dress. Something told Brandon to just keep driving. But then he thought, what if she's in trouble? What if her car broke down and she needs help? Against his better judgment, Brandon slowed down and pulled over about 20 feet past where she was standing. He watched in his side mirror as the woman walked toward his car. She moved slowly, almost gliding across the pavement. Brandon rolled down his passenger window as she approached. "You okay?" he called out. "Need a ride?" The woman leaned down to look through the window, and Brandon got his first good look at her face. She was pretty, but there was something off about her expression. Her eyes were completely blank, like she was staring through him rather than at him. "Can you take me home?" she asked. Her voice was flat, monotone. Yeah, sure," Brandon said, even though every instinct was screaming at him to drive away. "Where do you live?" "Down the road," she said simply. She opened the passenger door and got in. Brandon immediately noticed two things. First, she smelled weird, like old flowers and dirt. Second, she was absolutely freezing. When her arm brushed against his, it was like touching ice. "You cold?" Brandon asked, turning up the heat. "What happened to your car?" "Just drive," she said, staring straight ahead. Brandon put the car in gear and pulled back onto the highway. The woman sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, not blinking. "So, where exactly am I taking you?" asked Brandon after a few uncomfortable minutes. "You'll know," she said. "You'll know? What does that mean?"
The woman didn't answer. She just kept staring straight ahead at the dark road. Brandon was starting to seriously regret picking her up. "Look, I need an address or at least a landmark or something. I can't just—" "There," the woman said suddenly, pointing to an upcoming side road. Brandon turned onto the narrow dirt road. His headlights illuminated an old, run-down farmhouse about half a mile ahead. "That's your place?" Brandon asked. The woman nodded. As they got closer to the house, Brandon could see it was in terrible condition. Broken windows, collapsing porch, weeds growing everywhere. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. "Are you sure this is—" Brandon started to say, but when he turned to look at the passenger seat, the woman was gone. The seat was empty. Brandon slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding. "What the hell?" He looked in the back seat. Nothing. He checked the door. It was still closed and locked from the inside. She had just vanished. Brandon sat there for a moment, trying to process what just happened. Then his headlights caught something in front of the old farmhouse. There was a small cemetery, just a handful of old graves surrounded by a rusted iron fence. Brandon didn't want to, but something compelled him to get out of the car. He walked slowly toward the cemetery, his phone's flashlight shaking in his hand. He walked through the creaking gate and shined his light on the headstones. Most were so old and weathered he couldn't read them, but one caught his eye. It was slightly newer than the others, from 1985. The name on the headstone made Brandon's stomach drop. Sarah Mitchell, beloved daughter, born 1967, died 1985. She's still looking for her way home. Next to the name was a photograph embedded in the stone. Even though it was old and faded, Brandon could clearly see the face of the young woman he'd just had in his car. The same woman who had vanished from his passenger seat. Brandon ran back to his car, threw it in reverse, and sped back to the highway. He didn't stop driving until he was back in his own driveway 3 hours later. The next day, Brandon looked up the address online. The farmhouse had belonged to the Mitchell family. In 1985, their daughter Sarah had been killed in a car accident on Highway 83. She'd been walking home late at night when she was hit by a drunk driver who never stopped. Her body was found on the side of the road, wearing a white dress. She was trying to hitchhike home. Brandon told me he's driven that highway dozens of times since then, but he's never seen her again. But sometimes, late at night, when he's alone on that stretch of road, he swears he can smell old flowers and dirt, and he never, ever stops for hitchhikers anymore.